Welcome to the Nordic Celtic Ancestry. Today, gonna talk a little bit about my ancestry and heritage, and this is one of the primary reasons why I'm interested in the history, archaeology, culture of the Norse Gaelic people, because that is where I'm from. That is my genetics. So both sides of the family have this Nordic Gaelic culture sense. So not only from the area where they were in, but from actually the genetics and the DNA. So starting on my mother's side with her father, who comes from Clan MacTavish. This family was from Dunodry in Argyll, in western Scotland. They themselves are a Norse Gael clan because of the marriage between Tavish's father and Sween the Red of Sween Castle, which produced Tavish. Now, Sween was married to a Norwegian princess. He was the king of the Isle, this North princess. And their daughter was, half Irish, Scottish-Irish, and half Norse, would marry Tavish's father, who was a Gaelic Scottish lord in Argyll. And this produces Tavish, and from there the MacTavish clan and family would evolve. The family would spread on down into my great-grandfather's generation, and from that point they would be married into the Greer family that was an offshoot of the MacGregors of Scotland. Then the next family line that would be married into this would be the MacDougall family from Clan MacDougall, also in Argyll, just north of the MacTavish lands and the Campbell lands near Oban. Now, the MacDougall family, this clan, is from Somerled, who also just so happens to be a Norse Gaelic clan. MacDougall comes from is a grandson, or Dougal is a grandson of Somerled. Somerled had married a Norse princess as well, and was the petty king of the Isles, known as the Lord of the Isles, would produce the MacDonalds, the MacDougalls, and the MacRagnars, and other clans. So the MacTavishes would be married into this MacGregor set, then would be married into this MacDougall set. Then they would marry into, they would travel into Ireland and into Antrim, and from there they would marry into the O'Clehan family, which was an Irish family. And from there, they would marry into my great-grandmother's family, who was an O'Golan from County Mayo, with roots in the western sections of Mayo and in Achill Island. From there, my grandfather was born. This is on my maternal mother's side. Now, he would marry my mother's mother, who was a Jones. They were a Welsh-Irish mixed family. Her father was from a legacy of along the border of Kinmare, around Kerry and Cork area, the McShans. His mother was a Torin, and the Torins were originally from the Isle of Skye. It is believed that the little town or community on the Isle of Skye called Torin took their name after this family, or perhaps the family took their name after that. We don't know, but the family would end up in Donegal and eventually marry into my grandfather's family, or my great-grandfather's family. Now, her mother was an Pruitt, who has Welsh and Irish ancestry, but her great-grandmother was a Shawnee Indian that married this Pruitt. Now, this Pruitt was, a mixture of Welsh and Irish. But her mother's mother would be a Ramsay, and direct descent of the Earls of Dalhousie area south of Edinburgh in Scotland. not too far from the Roslyn Chapel and Temple Church area. And they were a Ramsay. They were the Scottish family. So that's my mother's ancestry. So you see there's a Norse Gaelic genetics being passed down with a little mixture of, Welsh and a small sliver of Native American. They go on to my father's side. The Slatons, the mysterious Slatons. Now, we do not have any DNA connections to any Slatons in the world. There are different groups. There's a northern branch Slaton that came into Massachusetts, a northern part of the United States. They were from Ulster, Ireland. They had came originally from Scotland. We're not kin to those Slatons. There's other Slatons that are found in Minnesota and Wisconsin area. These were immigrants from Sweden. Now, I don't know their DNA. We could quite be kin to these people, but I don't know. But as far as I know, we're not. Then we have the Slatons in Virginia that we used to think that we were possibly kin to. Well, DNA has proved that we are not any kin to these Slatons. Also, there are several Slatons and Slatons in England that we show zero genetic connections. We're not kin to any of these Slatons. There's some Slatons with a weird spelling in Germany that we're not kin to. There's also some possibly from Russia with a Z. They're a Jewish family. Not kin to these people either. So where did we come from when we came into the Carolina, George? Well, there's a lot of family lore about the Irish and the Scots-Irish and the Scots Gael, but typically the idea is somehow, some way, George himself or perhaps his father was from Tipperary, Ireland. This is an area where there's a town called Ballyslaton. Ballyslaton there in Tipperary is possibly that the family fled some type of political persecution in Ireland and ended up in the Carolinas. From there back, we really don't know, but there is some connections to some McIntyres and also some O'Moores. There is also connections to the MacSlatons that came from Northern Ireland that moved to Scotland. The last Slatons known in Tipperary was Patrick and Mary Slaton and their son Thomas from pretty close, I think, between Cashel and Cahir, down not too far from where Ballyslaton is. Now, this connection says that they were possibly from Donegal and they came over from the Alaskay, Northern Argyll, into Ulster, Ireland during the time of Edward the Bruce's invasion, when he became High King of Ireland and sought to drive the the Anglo-Normans out of Ireland and to become High King. This attempt would be a futile attempt, and many of the Norse Gaelic Galaglass would stay in the north of Ireland, and many would become part of the mercenary soldiers for many Gaelic clans and Donegal especially. Now, this Slaton, which is probably, this is not our original name, interesting enough, it comes from a Norse word, sletta, which means field. Now, the word Slaton Slaton is found all over Sweden and Norway, and it means a farming settlement or fertile land or farmland, grassland, used in a valley. It is found far north in Finnmark in Norway, throughout central Norway. When I was in Norway earlier this year, I came across various spellings of it: Slatten, Sletten, Sletton, and same thing when I was in Sweden. Now, in Norway, the spelling tended to be Slatten or Sletten, but in Sweden, it tended to be Slatton, much similar to our name, and that's actually how the name was originally spelt here in the United States on the earliest records, was the dual T, Slatton, and sometimes Slaten. Now, Coming in the United States, it is asserted that he was either married to a Mary O'Bizzle or he was the son of Mary O'Bizzle. And this was some immigrants from Ireland. So this is the first known Slaton in the United States. And from there, his son, that through our line, Uriah, would marry. There's many conjurants. There's a Mary McCarthy and Mary Stone. There's really no proof of who his son married, but his son would produce a son by the name of Azariah-Slaton, who married a woman who was half Irish, half Scottish, and her name would be Melinda Landrum. Her father was Larkin Landrum, and they were from Ireland. From Scotland. The Landrums were from Scotland, and her mother's side of the family came from Ulster, Ireland. From there, my second great-grandfather, Francis Morgan Slaton, would marry a woman with Brooks and O'Core surnames for parents. Now, the O'Cores came originally from Donegal, and there's a area there in Donegal called Coors Point, not too far from Glimmercumsel, and close to Adara and Glentees. They would have married. My great-grandfather would be a product of that. My great-grandfather, who was William Dennis Slaton, married a woman by the name of Westmoreland. Now, Westmoreland's family heritage is that they were the Earls of Westmoreland from the de Neville family. So this is a Norman family that came into England, but it's through the maternal markers. This wealth was inherited through the de Nevilles. Now, she would marry a man that was descendant of the original Pictish and Scottish kings. And this woman would marry into that line. And it would be their son that decided to take the name de Neville and eventually just dropped the duh and became Nevilles. And they became Earls of Westmoreland. They were the Barons of Raby and the Earls of Westmoreland. They had a falling out because I think the last Neville, I think it was Charles, either Henry or Charles Neville, had a falling out with the government, with the monarchy, because he supported, I believe it was the Jacobites' cause to restore a Stuart king to the throne of England. So the family, most of the family disowned the Neville name and took the name of their earldom as Westmoreland. Now, this woman was married into a Busby line, and these people were from Scotland. They were Scots-Irish, probably because there was a lot of Irish in their line and a lot of Scottish in their line. They would produce my grandfather, and he would in turn marry my grandmother. Now, my grandmother's family is a mixture of Welsh, Irish, and Dutch German with some English mixed in. And her grandmother was an O'Hurley from County Cork. And then her father was a Davis, who might have been from Welsh descent, but ended up in Tyrone, in the north of Ireland. And then her mother's father, her grandfather, would be a old German Dutch that had came into the United States to New Amsterdam area. It was called New Holland there. It's now New York and New York City. But after these guys immigrated over from Ireland, they would get married here in the United States. And my grandmother would be a product of that. From there, they have my father, who married my mother, and here I am. So that's 15 minutes of a generic study. The incredible thing is that my family roots go all the way back through the Campbells and the Stewarts, the McDougals, all the way back to Robert the Bruce on both sides of my family, and also Edward the Bruce is also a grandfather of mine through another channel. Going into Ireland, Brian Boru of the famous O'Brien family from Munster, one of the last great high kings of Ireland, is also 32nd grandfather. So way back, but Murrough O'Brien, who was, I believe, the Earl of Dermot, or somewhere around that region, is I believe my 8th great grandfather. So connections to to several Irish kings connected also through the Ramsay side. They had married into some people that were the Mac-Alexanders, who were from Scotland, but their lineage is also from the O'More family, from the famous Roger O'More, who was an Irish rebel. And through that line, it was actually his father. I believe Roger O'More would have been my great granduncle, and his father would be a great grandfather of mine. So it's just interesting to see how the family spreads back into these nobility and kingships of Ireland. Also, the same in Scotland, through the Stuarts and the Bruces, all the way back through King William and Alexander, stretching all the way back to the Malcolms and the Kenneths and so forth. Through that, because everyone married everybody, when you're of high nobility or royalty, several connections to the kings of Sweden and Denmark and Norway. Looks like I'm having technical difficulties, but this is my historical heritage breakdown. So if you know yours and you can spread it out on both sides of your family through your 4 grandparents, I'd love to hear. As always, keep studying, keep learning more about your family. And until next time, up the Irish, up the Scottish, and up the Nordics.